Record. All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's 12:30. I'd like to welcome everybody here today. My name is Mark Burke. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the co-directors of the Developmental Core here at the CFAR. And Marcia, are you there? Want to have Marcia introduce herself because everybody knows who Marcia is. But I do want her to say a quick hello to everybody once she gets on here. Hi, Marcia. Great to see you again. Oh, you're on mute.
Greetings, everyone.
So this is a really hopefully going to be a very unique event, and one that we're going to carry on for a number of sessions. But this Benchside to Community is an opportunity for our scientists, students, and community members to really come together and have a discussion, a meaningful discussion based on the research that's going on here at the DC CFAR. And I'm very excited to have our three participants, Alberto Bosque, Riko, and Janiya here today. And Marcia, would you like to say anything before we hand it off to our honored guest today?
No, it is exciting. I think we all are always wanting to know how we can break science down to a level where we all can understand it, where we can all at least have share in the experience of understanding science, and people are eager to do it. Community is eager to know, and I think a lot of our research community is also. So I think this is a great start. So welcome to everybody.
Yeah, and it's one of these events that we get to really have meaningful discussion between community and scientists, and any sort of barrier that's been put up, we want to break that down and really make sure that line of communication is open. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our moderator for today, Miss Janiya Brooks. She happens to be one of my students from Howard University, a real star student, and she started with me when she was a senior in high school and has been with me for the past, has it been 3 years already? She's well on her way of becoming a rising young scientist. She has her first author paper that's been submitted, which is pretty incredible for a rising junior in university to have. But she has spearheaded this project and is working on several other ones. So I'm really happy to introduce Miss Brooks. I'll probably, since I'm her mentor, I'll probably still be jumping in every once in a while here for her. But I'm going to introduce Miss Brooks and let her take over. So I'm going to go on mute. Just to let you know, this is being recorded. You guys should have all had the little pop-up screen come on already. And once we get the chance, we'll put this as a community resource on our DC CFAR website. So we're looking forward to that as well. So Janiya, go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. As Dr. Brooks said, my name is Janiya Brooks. I am I'm a junior now. I'm a junior honors biology major, chemistry minor, and I'm from Prince George's County originally. As Dr. Brooks said, I started doing research with him when I was just a senior in high school. So now I'm going to be a junior. So I've been just conducting research for a few years now, and I like to think that, I've contributed, if anything, to Dr. Brooks' research. So it's really been a great experience so far. I'm really happy to be here and serve as the moderator / MC for this event. And this event is really just meant to be a conversation. I hope to, just sort of serve as, because, I'm just a student. And so I'm still learning all of this new information, and I'm just really excited to engage in this conversation with everyone. This research is really important to me. I've been doing this for several years now, and so I'm just excited to learn more information, and I hope you guys are as well. I now want to pass the invisible microphone to Alberto so he can introduce himself now.
Thank you, Janiya. So as I say, my name is Alberto Bosque. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology, and Tropical Medicine at George Washington University. As a part of introduction, I did my PhD at the University of Zaragoza in Spain. I'm a biochemist by training and a cell biologist. So I do a lot of what we call basic research, and I will talk a little bit about that. And I've been working on HIV, and particularly on HIV cure for now the past 15 years. And I'm really excited to be to be talking to anybody and to talk also with the community and discuss our projects and how, and what are we doing from the basic science point of view into trying to find a cure for HIV. Now I will pass the microphone to Riko.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Riko Boone. So I am a doctoral student at GW in the Department of Psychology, or Psychological and Brain Sciences is the full name of the department. And I am working with Dr. Lisa Boleg at GW and have been since 2016. I'm also originally from the DC, Maryland area. After having moved back to the area for grad school after living for about 16 years in New York City. And I'm a social worker by training, a public health social worker, and studying social psychology at GW currently. So I did my two masters at Columbia University in social work and public health, and finishing up my PhD at GW now in social psychology. So, my background is primarily in working in HIV prevention, working with LGBT youth, implementing, CDC effective prevention interventions, behavioral interventions with young people and families impacted by HIV. And yeah, I've been working in the field of HIV for 24 years, since 1997, and specifically on HIV cure since 2017. So I'm going to pass the mic back to Janiya, I think, now. to see to push us along in our conversation today.
Yes, so I believe we're going to get started with our PowerPoint presentation now.
Yeah, I have a small power presentation where, just a second, I now need to open PowerPoint. It was open. Let's see if I can share it now. There it is. So, okay, so this is a really, and as we wanted to keep this, is a really informal, and is more, and I prepared a few slides just as a matter of to start the conversation. What is in these slides is, it is only an introduction into our discussion today, and I want to use it as a platform for you to either ask questions or for us to talk about it. And I like to start, and I always use this slide with my students on HIV transmission. We are going to be talking about HIV cure, or we want to discuss HIV cure, but we need to all be aware of how HIV can be transmitted. And I made this slide because I think it's a really nice way of showing the different ways where HIV can be transmitted, and they're either with the contact with infected fluids, blood, semen, vaginal secretion, or breast milk, the injection of infected blood or blood products, as well as mother-to-child transmission during either pregnancy, in childbirth, or breastfeeding. So that's use probably something that this audience knows about. But what we know is that HIV can be treated with antiretroviral therapy. And actually, antiretroviral therapy prevents the deterioration of the immune system by HIV, the development of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS, and the death associated to AIDS. But also, antiretroviral therapy prevents the acquisition of HIV when taken prophylactically, as the case of PrEP, as well as the use of, as well as eliminate the sexual transmission of HIV. As you all know, undetectable equals untransmissible, or untransmittable, sorry. I had some animation. So what we know is that antiretroviral therapy does not cure HIV. And why? So what we know that HIV can persist, hiding in a proportion of the cells that infect. So we know that HIV infects specific cells of the immune system, and in a portion of those the virus becomes what we call latent, or is hiding from the antiretroviral therapy, from the immune system. So, in this state, HIV is latent or dormant. It's almost like a cicada, just because we are on the cicada time, but one of these days we'll all be seeing here in DC is that it becomes latent unless there is a situation in which HIV wakes up, and one of those will be the stopping of antiretroviral therapy. So, but why is this dormant HIV important? I don't know. I heard a clicking. I don't know if somebody asked a question. I cannot see the chat while I'm in the presentation mode. So, but if you wanna ask something right now or wait until I'm done, it will be in 5 minutes. That will be okay. I just cannot see the chat. Why is this dormant HIV important? Is because, as I said, if antiretroviral therapy stop, the virus can replicate and AIDS can progress. Is then an HIV cure achievable? And that is something that we are looking, and we think that there is, because we have 2 cases that are well documented, that are Timothy Brown, the Berlin patient who fortunately passed away not long time ago, as well as a recent Adam Castillejo who has been HIV free for at least 5 years, and are called the London patient. So, but how do we do this not only in 2 people, but in many other individuals? So there are many ways that researchers in the labs are looking for cure approaches. So a lot of us, we work in what we call basic research. So we do research regarding HIV in different models and using cells in the tissue culture, or using cells in the lab. And those can be different cancer cell lines. So these are immortalized cells from different cancers that are now used in different labs and can be used as a model system to study HIV and HIV cure approaches, as well as primary cell models. That is what my lab is doing. And it's basically, we can use a person's white blood cells, and then we can establish this latency in the lab. As well as we can use cells that are isolated, or tissues that are isolated from persons that are living with HIV, because we know that they are some cells that are latent infected cells. Once we develop or identified a potential cure for HIV, the next step is what we call a translational research. We need to address whether in a more complicated system, either in mostly animal models, either mice models or monkey models, these approaches that we are testing in the laboratory can actually be translated into a potential clinical cure. And we use diverse models. Once we know about the efficacy and the safety of these strategies on these different models, then research goes into clinical research, and where we evaluate these cure strategies in people living with HIV. So what we call this is benchside to communities, because we need to be sure that we transform the discoveries that are made in the laboratory into a safe and beneficial therapeutic strategy to cure HIV. These therapeutic strategies that we are developing need to take into account diversity of the populations that are affected with HIV. These therapeutic strategies need also to overcome barriers to implementation in the face of highly active antiretroviral therapy. As you know, antiretroviral therapy has changed the face of the disease. Is not a deadly disease, it become a chronic disease. And some of these strategies that we are developing in the laboratory may not be as easy to implement as taking into account that people have mostly safe drugs. And we think, and this is for me from the basic science point of view, and I've talked a lot with Riko and others, that community has to be at the front of any development of a cure strategy, because that will mitigate potential drawbacks due to the low implementation, accessibility, or lack of studies, including diversity of the communities affected by HIV. So regardless of the models that we use, and I realized that I had to reorganize the presentation, but we use models in the lab, and the most important, I took this from a class, and it's something to discuss, is that the most important question about any model, or in this case latency on HIV cure model, is how wrong is likely to be and how useful is despite its assumptions. Because you must start with models and they overlay them with common sense and experience. And all models are wrong, some models are useful. And in that regard, we in the lab are trying to develop models that are useful to evaluate different cure strategies. And I only have one slide about how our model, and I try to make it in a simpler way. So we can take blood from anybody. We now normally get it from a blood bank. From that blood, what we do is use a process in which we separate the cells that are present in the blood from the red blood cells, and we get the white blood cells. Those white blood cells are then using a magnet and specific reagents, we can isolate the cells that HIV infects, that are CD4 T lymphocytes. Those CD4 lymphocytes are cultured in the lab in flasks with HIV for approximately 7-10 days during a procedure that we do in the lab. After that time, we know that HIV has established what is called this latent reservoir. And then we can assess different cure approaches in this latent reservoir to try to find ways to eliminate HIV. So what questions are we asking is that, how does HIV become latent or dormant? Because it's really important to know what are the mechanisms that are influencing that state, because it's the state that we cannot treat right now with antiretroviral therapy. Most importantly, can we eliminate this latent HIV from these lymphocytes? Is there a way to eliminate all this latent HIV in a way that we can promote a long-term cure? And in particular, we are also really interested in address how does biological sex, age, and sex hormones can influence the ability of HIV to either become latent or to be eliminated. And obviously, this is not done alone in the lab. So there is many people that I need to thank. And as this, I didn't know there is the Nigerian proverb, it takes a village. So it's a Nigerian proverb, because this cannot be done in isolation. It has to be done with a lot of different groups and members in my lab, but also different collaborators around the United States and around the globe, as well as funding. And with that, this is kind of, now we can start our discussion.
I just wanted to say, like, this is a very, we're trying to make this as informal as possible. So if anybody, if you guys want to jump in and add to the conversation, then please feel free to. We really want this to involve everyone. But I did have a few questions just to sort of kickstart the conversation, if that's okay. And so my first question would be, like, why do you guys think that seminars like this are important to educate people? Why is it important? Why does it matter?
Sure, I'll jump in there.
This is for Alberto.
Okay.
It's for me. Oh, so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't. No, that, I mean, why I think, I mean, where we think that is important. I think it is, as I said, it is really important in this stage, and in particularly, I think, for HIV cure, in which we can address early to the community what are our thoughts and how can we, so I think, and for as for many other approaches, and I think for cure approaches, there is going to be a moment where we maybe find a cure, but then it has to be implemented, and it has to be done in agreement with the community that is affected by HIV. And having them on board from the beginning, and having them understanding what we are doing from the scientific point of view, I think it is really important, because I think knowledge is power. And when you know what, these scientists in the lab with their lab coats are doing, it is something that it helps to understand that, in the future, there may be a treatment, and then we'll need to go through clinical trials, and then there will need to be participants that are involved in this clinical research. And if they know what we are doing from the beginning, I think you bring them along all the way until we reach that stage.
Riko, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, sure. No, I would just say, sorry for jumping in too soon there. But, I would say that, seminars like this are important because, we are now, this year, this June, marks the 40th anniversary of when, AIDS was first described in 1981. And, there's been a lot of development since then, but unfortunately, there's still about, approximately 40 million people, living with HIV currently, and definitely, kind of communities that are still disproportionately, contracting HIV and living with HIV compared to other groups. And so I feel like, these types of seminars are important because this information is critical 40 years into the epidemic, and, even 25 years since antiretroviral therapy, was made widely accessible to folks, but yet there's still a lot of disparities, right? And so, in order to make this information more accessible, to the people, like Alberto said, that are disproportionately impacted, we need to kind of, have continued opportunities for, teaching and learning and sharing, like this seminar.
Yes, I totally agree. And if anything, specifically that this COVID-19 pandemic that we're in, and even with the distribution of the vaccine, I'm seeing that people are very skeptical. And so I think that seminars like this are important because it's sort of, I'm just trying to, because obviously I wasn't really alive when the AIDS epidemic first started, but I'm really just seeing how important it is. Like it was said, knowledge is power. And so I think it's important for us to understand what exactly it is that is being done in the research, and how, because most of the research is conducted in animal models. And so for something for me that was really interesting to learn is how similar the primates that are used in labs are to us. That's, something that I learned from doing my research with Dr. Burke. And so, but anyways, it's just so important that we know exactly what's being done so that when it's given to people, especially our communities of color, which are disproportionately impacted by HIV, it's important because I do think there can be a large sense of distrust between, sort of the government and our communities of color. And so that's why I really think that it's important for us to learn this information.
Well, and if I'm just going to say that it helps scientists. I think, most of us, and I'm going to talk, this is at least from my point of view. I mean, for those of us that work in a laboratory on the basic science, we don't interact with people living with it. We don't have that interaction with people like living with HIV, like, for example, an MD will have, right, where they have their patients. So there is a lack of that human part of the research that is really important to bring into the labs, even in the basic science, because, for like mentees that are going into, like you, into that research, it puts the human perspective. It puts that what we are doing is not because either, I need to get a PhD, or am I going to get another grant, or I need to get tenure for a professor. Is that what we are doing in the lab? It is something that is going to impact people. It is going to impact people. And I think for the basic scientist, sometimes there is not that direct connection in any field. I'm not talking only HIV, but it can be HIV, it can be cancer, it can be because to make that connection, that what you are doing, even although it may seem small, right? I mean, sometimes you can say, you are doing something in this well, and I don't know how. It may have a bigger impact the long term. And I think, and understanding that, I will always say, and sorry, I don't want to take the conversation, but the first time that I went to an AIDS meeting, I started working with HIV when I started doing my postdocs, not during my PhD in Spain. And the first time that I went to an IIS meeting and an AIDS meeting, it changed my mind, because it's like, you see, and sometimes people don't understand that, but you see what you are doing, the impact that you can have, and that I think that is really important to have these conversations between the scientists and the community.
That's actually a really good point that you just made, because I didn't think about that. I know myself, because before the pandemic hit, a lot of the Howard students, we have day of service where we go out and do community service. And so one thing that we did was we went to a local soup kitchen and just sort of serve food to the people that were coming in. And so I did actually see a lot of individuals who like, the people at the shelter, they spoke to us about how they are impacted with AIDS, and how it really did open my eyes, because I myself had been, just in the lab and doing research, but I didn't see the actual implications of what it has on people's lives. So you're right, that is important to see that as a scientist as well. Okay, so I have another question for Alberto, if that's okay.
Can I jump in very quick, please? This is
Oh,
Natalia.
no, please.
I just wanted to say that sometimes the disconnection is also between the provider community, scientists. So it's all, you know, kind of a circle. There are some providers that are not related to science by any means, and you know, we as scientists, at least I work always with human samples. So I totally need that connection, and sometimes that is very hard to get. I just wanted to also point out that.
I also wanted to, if I could, tag on to what you said, Janiya, about what some of the things that we're learning from COVID, what COVID has taught us. I think is very important to, you know, because we do have right before us this whole example of what happens when, you know, when information is not known more to the community. You know, some of the, as Dr. Kizzmekia said, Kizzmekia Corbett said in a talk the other night in a town hall I heard her in with MSNBC. She talked about, first of all, she likes to call it vaccine inquisitiveness and not vaccine hesitancy. And I think it is, and then you kind of made me think more about language. And, you know, so, you know, looking at, you know, kind of change the narrative a bit when we're talking about basic science and being transparent, a bit more transparent, because the question of, you know, how did this vaccine become available so fast? I mean, people didn't know that, you know, what was being done in the labs, even all the years before, that made it possible to build on those things and, you know, and to quickly develop a vaccine. So this part of what this seminar does is also things like this seminar, because there are other ways, obviously, that we can do it. But, you know, to also kind of make it very apparent, much more transparent what's happening in the labs, you know, and, you know, in that way, and by doing some of the things that we talked about in terms of bringing people, making sure that, you know, it's people first. So, you know, that you realize that whether you're in the lab or wherever you are, that it's people first that we're focused on here. And the other point I'd just like to make is just, you know, having someone like you, Janiya, who's a scientist in the lab who looks like you. I mean, we need to see people who look like us and know that, and make those, you know, make sure those people are visible too. So I think all those help communities to more quickly embrace some of what's going on in basic sciences.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. And I think that, yeah, for me, drawing the conclusions between just between COVID and what we're discussing now, because COVID is so present. But I think that one, there's still a stigma when it comes to HIV, which I think is sort of causing this, I don't know, there's just a sort of a hesitancy when it comes to even, you know, people just talking about it or bringing it up, because there is still very much a stigma in our communities. You know, I'm a college student. And so even just on campus, you know, we as students are sort of working to break the stigma when it comes to even just having open conversations like this, because people can be so afraid to talk about it because they don't want to be labeled a certain way by people. So that's also another thing. And that same stigma can even be applied to, you know, like having COVID and having the, I know a lot of people who had COVID and are just very ashamed to share that. And so it's very interesting to see the similarities between the two.
Yeah, and I'll just real quickly kind of to piggyback off of what, you know, you just shared, Janiya and Marcia just shared. You know, I think that, you know, yes, we know that, you know, our communities are, you know, we have reason to be mistrustful and distrustful of, you know, medical providers and medical research, et cetera. But I really appreciated this, the point that Marcia made about kind of, you know, changing the language and changing the narrative and, you know, approaching this work from, you know, a strength-based kind of, you know, perspective, and not necessarily always from this kind of deficit-based, you know, what has gone wrong, what is wrong, but, you know, kind of learning from the past, learning from, you know, what's been wrong, and then kind of to move forward and, you know, push a different narrative, right? You know, because we, for instance, know that, you know, medical mistrust is an issue in certain communities more so than others, but we also can't stop there, right? And kind of, you know, kind of prevent the next step in the dialogue and conversation. So that's something that I think that even from the COVID pandemic, you know, how we've seen like so many educational, opportunities and sessions and seminars and meetings and town halls, and just for instance, the one that Marcia mentioned that Dr. Kizmika Corbett participated in last week, I've been highly impressed with what I've seen, in terms of the efforts to educate certain communities about COVID. And so, I think that, some of that medical mistrust is slowly kind of dissipating. And this vaccine hesitancy or acquisitiveness is also, dissipating, and people are becoming more, more trustful. And I think that, we need to kind of not lose sight of the fact that within communities, there are, some people who are mistrustful and many who are not. And so, we can definitely learn from, those who are not, say, as mistrustful, what motivates them to learn about this stuff, what motivates them to, talk to their family, friends, and neighbors and coworkers about HIV cure research or COVID vaccines, et cetera, and then kind of use those things to kind of, build out, larger interventions, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I have a question for, so Alberto, I know that you mentioned that you work with cells, and you also mentioned that there are gender differences. And so I was just wondering if you see differences in gender or even ethnic difference at a cellular level when you research.
Sorry, you cut off a little bit, but I think I got the full question. So, when we are looking in the cell, in cells, obviously we are looking about, and that is something that it took me a little bit of to learn. We're asking questions about biological sex, not about gender, because gender is fluid and biological sex is determined at birth. So that's the difference. We can only look at we cannot look at a complex system, because gender is a more fluid area. So we look at whether cells isolated from male and female as they at birth, there is some differences. So there are a few differences that are known even at the cellular level between male and female cells. So for example, in the context of HIV cure and HIV latency, we know that, for example, there are specific hormones, sex hormones, that will influence the activity of several reagents that are used to reactivate the virus in female but not in male cells, because of in association with particularly estradiol, right? There's a sex hormone. So there are sorry, I don't know why I almost speak in Spanish. Other mechanisms of reactivation that require the innate immune system, in which is known that some of the genes are actually in the X chromosome that associates with females. So there is differences on that as well. So there are, even at the cellular level, and we are doing a lot of those studies, some differences that are associated with HIV. I don't know if I answered all your question. Really, no, I haven't, because one of the things that we haven't looked at is based on race. Not for anything, but because we get the blood from a blood bank in which they don't provide that information. So unfortunately, we don't have an easy way to obtain large amounts of blood, knowing also the person's race right now. I mean, there are possibilities, and we are looking into that as well, to be able to address that question of whether, because it's known that there is a few differences even at the cellular level based on race, and we wanted to address those as well in the future. And we are looking for possibilities to expand our research on that direction. I don't know if I addressed your question.
Yeah, you did. That was a really great answer. Thank you.
Alberto, I have a question, follow up on that one. What about age? Because you mentioned hormones, especially gender hormones. We know as we age, especially in women, hormones change over time. Mm-hmm. How does that affect your research?
So that is a really good question, because one of the information that we know about the donors is the age, and we do have donors that go from 17 to 70 or 80 years old. So how are we doing we are in the lab, and some of the graduate students in the lab are working to look at how hormones will influence the activity of or even how HIV reactivates from latency, but not only looking at the biological sex, but also looking at the age of the donor. And then we are going to add the layer of sex hormones, and we are going to be, because in the test tube we can add the hormone, right? And then we know the levels of hormones that are found in plasma at different stages, even even not only during development, as well as, for example, in pregnancy or during menopause, but also during sex rearranger. So when trying to use male going into female, female into male, the sex hormones that are used, and how that is affecting the immunobiology of the cell when it is encountered with the different types of hormones. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. So we are looking into that because we have the possibility to get different donors with that are more into the older age.
And I want to kind of bridge that into the community response. How can the community be more involved with that? Because I know both Riko, Marcia, and Janiya, they all mentioned about health disparities. How much more necessary is it to get people of different ethnic backgrounds involved with this research?
Is that directly to me? I think that is
all of you. All of you. How would?
I think it is really important. I think diversity. One of the things that unfortunately, from the basic science point of view, that is really hard is when we start increasing the diversity. What you start increasing is that, and it's not. I will say sometimes people just want the results to be reproducible all the time, and once you start increasing the diversity of anything, either male, female, age, or race, or any other, so you increase how, for example, the cells of a specific individual reacts to X, Y, or Z are different, because we are all genetically distinct. So there is a little bit of that, is that the more diversity that you include, the more difficult that is to say, oh, this is the way that something works, because it may work in some individuals, but not in others. But I think as more we are going all to kind of this individualized medicine, right? It's a little bit what we are trying to go into, a more individualized research, in which why in individual X or individual Y, this doesn't work the way that it works for the other individual. Is there is something particular to that individual that is making X, Y, or Z work better than in the other one? And what is that association?
Yeah, and I'll just add that, I think a lot of this, your question mark is an important one, because we tend to kind of think about HIV and AIDS now as a chronic condition that is not a deadly disease. And I think that kind of also feeds into why, certain, the stigma, for instance, that Janiya mentioned earlier, it's like, okay, people are living with this now. And if you're living with this now, you're less likely to die. There's medications available, et cetera. Alberto mentioned U equals U even. But what we failed, the missing piece kind of in that, for me, and I think a lot of folks, probably share this sentiment and concern, is that for some communities, HIV is very much still a deadly disease. And not only is it very much still a deadly disease, but there's, exponentially higher risk of contracting HIV in certain communities compared to others. And so these are, reasons why we need, different voices at the table, those who are, disproportionately impacted and disproportionately most likely to die from HIV and AIDS when they, unnecessarily, when they don't have to be. And so these are voices that we can kind of, bring to the table and engage in ways that, lets them know that, this research is happening, that, even when we think about kind of the HIV vaccine research trials, there was a study that came out, I think just this year or earlier this year, January, that showed that, among HIV vaccine studies, Black people, for instance, only represented about 10% of the samples of about 230 vaccine studies, which is, there's been increases over the years, yes, and, participation among racial ethnic minorities, et cetera. But, when you think about the fact that, Black folks are more likely to die, much more than 10% compared to other communities, or the fact that, Black people are disproportionately, likely to contract HIV, for instance, but yet they only represent 10% of volunteers in HIV vaccine studies. That's not good. And so I think that, we can definitely do better in terms of engaging and bringing more voices to the table, even prior to clinical trials, which I'm grateful that, Alberto is looking at, other kind of diversity questions within HIV cure research, because it doesn't have to happen at the clinical trial part. It can happen even prior to that, and the types of cells that we even get from, banks, blood banks and hospitals and, volunteers to make those samples more diverse too.
So Riko and Janiya, I have a question for you, and this is perfectly selfish reason for as an educator. So when I teach about HIV in my physiology classes, for example, I tell them, back 40 years ago, HIV was not something that people say, oh, I'll live with it. Now it's really, we're fighting the stigma and we're fighting the good fight, saying, it is a chronic disease, but it's manageable now, right? So I challenged my students, and this is kind of the difference between a head knowledge and a heart knowledge. So I challenged my students, asking them, and I like your slide, Alberto, the undetectable, meaning you can't, that is not spreadable, right? I asked my students, so they got that, they understand that people can live a normal lifespan and a happy life and everything living with HIV, because it is really living now. So I challenged my students and said, and remember, these are all university students, so all Janiya's age. So I asked them, I said, so how likely is it for one of you to date somebody and then bring them home to mom and dad and say, oh yeah, by the way, they're HIV positive? And you could see even over Zoom, they're like that. How do we get from that kind of head knowledge saying this is a condition you live with versus something on that heart knowledge, if you will? Yeah, I think that's really kind of the breakdown of the stigma.
Yeah, that's one. I did want to add that yes, like you said, this is something, yes, you can live with it. It's not necessarily the end of the world, but one, like we said, to go back to the disproportionately affected communities, it's expensive. To have a disease that you're going to live with for the rest of your life seems incredibly expensive, going to the doctor with copays. And so just because you can live with it does not mean that, say you get infected at a younger age, and this is something that you're going to be paying for if you have health insurance for considerably the rest of your life. So even though it is, you can live with it, a lot of people cannot afford to live with it. So that is one thing that I think isn't addressed enough. And two, Dr. Berg, that's a really good, that's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that. There's definitely still, I know if that situation was to happen personally with me and my family, even breaking down that stigma would be incredibly difficult, just because a lot of my family members lived through the epidemic, the AIDS epidemic. And so I'm sure not even just one, out of a lack of knowledge, but two, simply out of a fear that still exists, that we don't really talk and that we don't really acknowledge, that fear is still there. So yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I love that question though, Mark. I think that even also goes back to kind of a point that Marcia made in terms of, changing the narrative, right? Because, if we think about kind of, the shows that are on television now, for instance, like Pose on FX and all of these other great shows that are kind of, yes, speaking to that history about HIV, kind of once being a very life-threatening illness. And now not as much, but yes, still life-threatening for certain communities more so than others. I think that shows like that and other, other campaigns and opportunities really are, are integral, right? Into kind of like changing that, that narrative and letting folks know that, yes, HIV is still around. Yes, it still is serious for certain communities, but it doesn't have to be, right? And that's why we all can kind of mobilize and come together in order to, kind of address this. I like something that Dr. Fauci, has said and continues to say and kind of promote, and that's that we have everything. We have all of these tools in our toolbox to end HIV in my lifetime, in Janiya's lifetime. And I think that, some people may not believe that, may not know that because they don't have access to opportunities like this to learn about what's happening, right? And so, and I appreciate that statement from Dr. Fauci, but I will say, and we have to also remember that yes, we have everything that we need to end quote unquote HIV except for a cure, right? And so that is like the one thing that still needs to be kind of a priority for everybody, including folks, young folks like Janiya. I'll consider myself young as well, and even though I've been around a while doing HIV work, but I think that we have to kind of make that that end game a priority for all communities, not just those who are most likely to participate in cure studies.
I just want to throw in there too that while we do have all the tools, and when people say that, I always want to remind them that one of the tools that we don't have is how to address disparities, and social determinants. Those are the things that really also drive, infections in our community. So yes, we have all the biomedical tools. And I think even as we talk about ending the HIV epidemic, I mean, it really is very clear, certainly to me, and I think to a lot of us, that there are other issues that really need to be dealt with in order for people to have a chance at accessing and believing, that those tools will make a difference in their lives, So, I'm glad that social behavioral and biomedical is coming together and talking more to each other as well, because we really can't forget that's a huge part of getting to where we need to be.
And I really do want to open this conversation that if anyone else has anything to add, please feel free to just unmute yourself or even just add it into the chat. We'd love to talk with you guys as well.
I have a question or comment question regarding disparities, because in my studies, all the people that we have been able to enroll are from the Black American community, and we have non-whites. So my question is, could this be related to the impact, the disproportion of the impact of the infection into the African American community, or this could be also that the community is doing something very good and people are engaging more, or a mixture of both?
I think it could be a mixture of both. I mean, because honestly, like some of the people in your study, they might know someone in their family, or, maybe their parents are also, just encouraging them to do it, just because, like you said, just we're disproportionately affected. And so I think it might just be so like, okay, this is real. I can see the impacts of this every day in my community. Someone down the street I know is suffering from this. And so I think that might be a good, just something to really help motivate the people to enroll in the studies. But I think that's amazing.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely awesome, and certainly an outlier when you think of the broader landscape of HIV cure research. And so I will say to you, Natalia, that is a success story, right? And that is a success story that needs to be shared as widely as possible, right? Because getting back to changing this narrative that Marcia mentioned, and one of my recent studies that I worked on, we were looking at Black men who have sex with men in the kind of Eastern US. And we surveyed about 100 men who were PrEP naive and HIV negative. And we found that a quarter of them, 25%, had participated in some type of HIV medical research study in the past. And we were very clear about what medical research was. And they were like, yeah, I have participated in a study in the past. 25%, that is outstanding. And, much better than even, what we're seeing in terms of the HIV vaccine research that's been conducted that I mentioned earlier. So, again, that's a success story that needs to then be shared as widely as possible to start chipping away at some of these, informational barriers, medical mistrust barriers, et cetera. So I would encourage you to actually ask your participants why they're participating, right? If you're not already doing that, right? And I think that you'll get those answers to your question, like why is this the case?
We'll definitely do, yes. Yes.
I have a comment, and it's, I wonder about the narrative of medical mistrust. And as a behavioral scientist, I see that we assume that there is medical mistrust, that the origins are the Tuskegee experiments, but many people are not even born, many people don't even know. So to what extent even us researchers promote that narrative, or whether it is, whether that mistrust exists in the younger generations, or is this a thing of the past?
That's a great question, Dr. Zaya, and I will say that as you're aware, from some of the research that I've been doing, I've seen that young people in a study that I participated in, I just mentioned, were more likely to be mistrustful compared to older people, right? And so that kind of is curious, right? And I think even speaks to why we may be seeing young people less likely to take up vaccines for COVID now and participate in studies and whatnot, because maybe there's something missing there that we don't understand, that we need to figure out what is going on to make younger people more mistrustful than these older people who we would presume would be more mistrustful because of Tuskegee and all these things that they've learned about over the years. But that may not be true. And so, I would encourage researchers to meet their participants where they are and not assume that, medical mistrust is going to be a barrier until it comes up, in engaging with their communities and their study volunteers. And then, of course, address the past, address the history, but not to make it the first thing that, folks are, that you're talking about, because it may not even be salient for them. They may not be thinking about it until they hear it from you as a researcher.
The response actually made me think
I also,
people are more likely to be in social networks and looking at social media that it's anti-vaccine or who's spreading some of the misinformation. So that's a whole other issue, a new issue that it's emerging, like the anti-COVID vaccine, anti-vaxxers, et cetera. So we should look into that also. That's it.
I wonder how much researchers also are aware of the degree of mistrust specifically around HIV cure research, not just in, neither just in the younger community nor the older community. As a long-term survivor of HIV, who's an administrator of the largest single group of long-term survivors on Facebook, I can tell you that the degree to which the long-term survivor community believes there will never be a cure because it's just too profitable to keep feeding us daily medications is actually pretty stunning. I'm a clinical treatment educator, so I try to work against that idea, however often I come up against it. And I do, follow the research at a very technical level, which most of my clients and many of my peers aren't able to take an hour out of their day and sit in on a clinical forum like this. But I think more communication with the community of people actually living with HIV from researchers and a real effort to make that research digestible to people who do not have a degree in chemical engineering, which I do, and certifications in clinical education is really something that is going to be absolutely crucial to encourage more participation, even among middle-class gay white men, much less among communities that are more traditionally affected by medical mistrust and by the history of medical misdeeds, if you will. That communication, I don't really see it happening. And I think it's really needed.
No, you bring a really good point on, and I think that is where we kind of start deciding to start this communication, right? Even if it is, you know, in this webinar, and to start talking and be frank about, you know, what we have, what we know, I mean, and what are the barriers for an HIV cure, because I think a lot of times there are, like, I mean, I think it happens in all the biomedical fields, not only on the HIV, you know, it's like the highlights on a newspaper sometimes are more dangerous than the actual research, or when people say, you know, we have this or we have that. And I think communicate, I mean, that's what we wanted to start in here. We wanted to start a communication and to try to, you know, I think one of the four researchers, one of the most difficult parts as well, and you probably know, it is that it's trying to put our research on the lay language in a way that it can be made understandable for everybody. And I think it is a part of education also of the researchers, including myself, and I'm putting myself in here, in a way that, you know, I can explain what I'm doing to a person who doesn't have to have a science background. I mean, my husband doesn't have a science background, so when I have to explain something, you know, it is that part, and is that difficult. My family, none of my family is scientists, so I not only have to explain this to them, but I also have to change language. So, which is a double complication. And I think we, and I put myself in there, I need to learn, and I need to learn from. You know, working with, I mean, we've been working with Riko for a long time now, and working with the community in how we can connect, and how can we talk, and how can we, you know, either address the fears that the community has about cure, but even about HIV, right? I mean, I do cure research, but it doesn't mean that I don't know anything about HIV, right? That's just like, and how do we communicate that information? How can we start talking or continue talking, right? I mean, that's the idea. And how, and people, I think, in a way that if somebody tells me, you know, I don't understand that, can you explain it to me? And I can do that. I mean, I think even for the scientists, we need to humble ourselves sometimes, that, you know, that is like, we need to be more approachable as much as possible. So.
And I think one other thing, kind of going with what Michael, you said about the people on your Facebook page saying, well, the pharmaceutical companies make too much money off of you, right? Alberto, myself, we're scientists. We don't make money off of that. So I think that's the other thing too, that when you're looking at the ground level basic researchers who are looking for the HIV cure, who are looking at the mechanisms to say, how can we get HIV out of latency so we can kill it? We're at that ground level. Alberto is at the forefront of that. He's not profiting from Gilead. He's not profiting from, it'd be nice if we would, but we're not profiting whatsoever. So I think that's I think that's kind of the way to combat this. I do want to say we're coming to the end of our hour, which is really sad. But from the title, you can see that this is episode 1. And Marcia emailed me, I'm going to share a little bit of this. Marcia emailed me a little while ago and said, well, we have episode 1, what are going to be the next episodes? And I purposely did not respond to you, Marcia, because I want this to be community driven. What are the topics that you want to hear about? I know I have some ideas about, from conversations I've had with people about, and I'll throw one out there. What about growing old with HIV? What does that do to our brain? Is that something of interest? And what are topics that you want to hear about? And then we will do our best to get our basic scientists, our community member, and our student aligned for that for the next episodes. So you could either tell me now, or you want to email me, or that anything you want to do, I'm very much open to it. And Marcia, is that okay if we do it this way? I should have asked you ahead of time.
Getting to know you a bit, Mark, your modus operandi. Anyway, that's a good way to go. Yeah, I just like to just wanted to see where we were trying to go with this. So, but yes, I think if people, I don't think the chat feature is working. At least I couldn't get
see anything in chat either.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So if people would send in, please send in your thoughts about what the next episode should be. Or what questions? What other questions that you have? I think it's a great way to go, Mark. So.
And this is a great way for our community members to say, hey, we want to direct this. We want to say what we want to learn about and engage somebody in that scientific field. And we can have multiple episodes. If we want more HIV cure, we can do more HIV cure and have more conversations on this. And again, this is really a way to break down walls and have open discussions.
And you can even be, you can be part of the presentation panel. I mean, I think the panel will change. And so if you have a question that you really impassioned about and, want to put it forward and be one of the leading discussants on it, I think that's very open as well. Right, Mark?
Absolutely. And Marcia, the other part of my modus operandi will be when you suggest something, I will be tapping you. Okay. So does anyone have any ideas about what they want, or would you kind of want to mull it over and email us?
I would say that, in my opinion, what we need is a plan and someone who really organize this as a continuous, Alberto was saying that it's great that we have started these conversations, but where are the people living with HIV? Where can we see them? At UNC, we used to have on the 1st of December, we always had these panelists that were people living with HIV. And that was the only interaction we had with them. It was some, but it was not to the level that we wanted. And I approached some CAB members, and we didn't know how to put it together. So everything was just those meetings, period. But it was not, a continuous conversations where you can really engage in both directions, as Alberto was saying. We need them, they need us. We need to understand, for us as humans is not profitable, absolutely. We need to understand what are those needs and, to come to that humane part, which is why we work in this. We are not going to be rich. We just want to, to make something for someone else. So in my opinion, we need organization. Someone say, I don't know, committee, something, volunteers, who wants to present this next session. Let's see how can we approach these people. We have these Zoom meetings now. It's super easy now. It's easier than ever before. We don't need to pay anything to have a room. So that's my opinion. But I think we need to take action. That's what we really need.
Okay. I know that we're running a couple minutes over. So again, I'd like to thank our panelists, Janiya, Alberto, Riko. Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you for being my partner in crime with this, helping to organize all this. And I'm really happy that we've gotten this chance, and I look forward to our next one. Probably sometime early fall, I would think. And I will talk about that. Anyways, I want to thank everybody for being here today. And again, please, if you have questions or comments, email myself or Marcia. I'm putting you out there, Marcia. I know we'll be in contact anyways. But I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for a great meeting.
Thank you.